of public institutions, they don't train them. For example, in the last 1 month or 2 months, we've had like 800 that have been appointed. They're taken to Naivasha for a day or 2 days. They're inducted. Then they are brought back to and told you now fit enough to do your job. Mr. Speaker, what the institute is going to be doing is to institute and mount continuous training, continuous capacity building of directors, not just of public institutions, but also of private institutions that have interest in this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it will interest you that the way we manage our public affairs is quite important. In the last 20 years, almost all our parastatals have been making losses. Almost all our public institutions have been making losses. Reason, they're not being run well. They are not being run in the right way, Mr. Speaker. And so if you are going to have these public entities running well, we must agree that SCAC, that 1 day, 2 day trainings is not the best way to go. And so this institute is supposed to help us. Mr. Speaker, whenever you hear corruption, you only hear CEOs, like, now if you've been watching the last 2 weeks, KVDA CEO or NLC CEO, you don't hear directors coming on board because they are largely absent. They depend on the CEOs to lead or mislead them on how they run the institutions. And so we want directors of our institutions to be aware, to be able to run this institution with probity, to be able to be inquisitive, to be able to have the ethos of good governance, so that if it is Kenya Power, if it is Rivertex, if it is our standards board, whatever it is run by a board that is competent, that understands what the role of these institutions are. Mr. Speaker, I hasten to add that the President had so many reservations on this bill when taken to him for signature. But why? Because largely, people don't want to be controlled. People don't want to be told how to do things. People want to do things haywire. People want a laissez-faire society where they're doing things without being, oversighted. So, Speaker, this bill creates a framework where as soon as an individual, a Kenyan citizen, is appointed as a director, then he reports to the institute, goes through a 6 weeks training that then prepares them to be able to run the affairs of those boards competently. And Mr. Speaker, part of the reasons why this bill is back to this House is that there are people who don't want the directors to be trained. There are those who don't want directors to have knowledge. There are those who don't want to lose their turfs. If SCAC's job is to induct, let them induct these directors, but let them allow the institute, then train them continually, and also give them what we call, and Mr. Speaker, you're a lawyer, you know what we go through every year. Every year as lawyers, we must go through what we call continuous legal education. We are asking for the same for directors, that once you are appointed, in the 3 years you are serving, you're able every year to go through continuous corporate governance education so that you understand how these things are run and you're able to know the emerging trends and emerging ways of running public institutions. This is what we're looking for in this bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill is not meant to oust the jurisdiction of the AG or of the SCAC in the role of directors. Mr. Speaker, number two, it is not meant to oust the powers of the corporate governance society in this country from doing what they do. But what we want to do, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that our entities, be it Kenya Airways, be it Kenya Airports Authority, be it Kenya Ports Authority, be it the small ones like NEMA, like the authorities created by the county governments, the water resources boards, Mr. Speaker, should be run in the right way. We cannot have a country where boards are places for resting people who are tired, for resting retirees, for ensuring that anybody who don't have a job is then put into some board somewhere. Mr. Speaker, this cannot be the way we run our very prized entities. If you have GDC and we want it to produce good thermal power, then we must make sure that in that board, we have guys who understand what is done in that institution. If you go to ensure that we connect the whole country with electricity, we must ensure that REA and KETRACO have a board that understands what happens in those areas. If you want to ensure that we're doing proper housing, you must ensure that the housing authorities in this country have boards that understand what they're supposed to do, Mr. Speaker. But this will not happen if we keep on gerrymandering and trying to ensure that our boards are not being run the right way. That is why then they become conduits for corruption, they become conduits for bad governance, and we don't get value for money at the end of the day. Mr. Speaker, efficiency and accountability are principles that cohere in our Constitution. These are things that we must learn to live with. The fact that, you want to have. Mr. Speaker, in the early 80s, when we were young people, through to early 90s, corporations were doing so well in this country. Everyone wanted to work for a corporation. But now corporations have become places where, and I don't intend any offense, but if you are a member of parliament today and you are appointed to be chairman, for example, of, say, KenGen, You don't understand it. I'm sure you need to be trained to understand what happens there. If you're a member of parliament today and you're appointed to be the chairman of nuclear radiation or regulation body, you may not understand what happens there. You need training. You need to be told how things work there so that you're able to add value what happens there. And this is the spirit, this is the ethos that we seek to push in this bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to appeal to the relevant government agencies, the presidency, the SCAC, the office of the AG. I've seen the report done by my senior chairman of Legal Affairs Committee, the Honorable Cheptumo. And I was in that committee with him in the last parliament. And in that committee that time, we passed this bill. We passed this bill, Mr. Chairman. And we said this is the right thing to ensure that we discipline how our corporations are run. But I'm surprised that now they are saying this bill because, I mean, if you look at the memoranda filed by a couple of institutions, and very well-meaning institutions, they're telling you this is the way to go to discipline our boards. This is the right way to go to ensure that there's some modicum of civility and competency running our board. But you are saying that this should be left to SCAC. SCAC has no capacity to train directors. But you want that once you're appointed, you must report. You must go through training to ensure that these things are done. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Honorable Malwa, and I want to second this bill and request members that if you want to ensure that our corporations and our public entities are run well, Mr. Speaker, we support this bill and put the right tracks and ways of capacity building to ensure that we are doing the right thing for posterity. Mr. Speaker, I second and thank honorable members for supporting this bill. Thank you so much.
Okay, order members, order. I propose a question which is that the Institute of Directors of Kenya Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2019, be now read a second time. Well, let's have, as is required, I will have Honorable Chair, Administration of Justice and Legal Affairs, and then therefore I'll give another member who's made a special request, that is Honorable Osoro. Is it Honorable Osoro who is asking us to put a question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to first of all thank Honorable Wamalwa for coming up with this bill. Mr. Speaker, I want to confirm that indeed this bill indeed was introduced in the 11th Parliament. It came before the Legal Affairs Committee, which I was also a member, and Honorable Ocheng. And we passed that bill, Mr. Speaker, at that time. And when the bill went before the President, it was returned back with some memoranda. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Wamalwa, thereafter now in the 12th Parliament, came up with this bill. It came before the Committee of Justice, and we subjected it to the usual public participation, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Article 118 of our Constitution requires that we receive few comments from the public, because and that will inform the decision of the House. And Mr. Speaker, I want to report to the House that indeed we received views from Institute of Certified Secretaries, ICS, Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, advocates, Al-Jawara and Khan Advocates, the Association of Professional Societies in East Africa, and one, Mr. James Nabangi. Mr. Speaker, I must say that the decision of the committee was guided mainly by this presentation by these institutions. And Mr. Speaker, I just want very briefly to mention some of the comments raised by these institutions. Mr. Speaker, the submissions by the Institute of Certified Secretaries, and Mr. Speaker, these are well laid in the report that we tabled in the House, which is now before the members, and it's going to help members to really understand this. And Mr. Speaker, one key issue which came out, and I think these are issues which never came out actually when we did this bill in the 11th Parliament. I must confess, this time the level of participation was very comprehensive, and we got comments from institutions which had never been able to do. Mr. Speaker, one of the concerns raised by this during the public participation is that there is no known specific body of professional skills that can identify a director from other persons or an organizations. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, is the bill seeks to regulate boards of directors. That role has already been assigned to sector regulators, including and not limited to the State Corporations Advisory Committee, that is the State Corporations, Capital Markets Authority for insurers of securities of the public, Insurance Regulatory Authority. We have also the Retirement Benefits Authority, Cervical Societies Regulatory Authority, and Central Bank of Kenya. So, Mr. Speaker, there is a challenge here. And, Mr. Speaker, it is important that as we pass laws in this House, we should not pass laws that conflict with other existing laws, which are consistent with our Constitution. And so, Mr. Speaker, the problem is that we have a number of laws, statutes, that govern the regulation of directors. For example, State Corporations Act, Mr. Speaker, tend to give guidance on how directors of state personnel are supposed to be managed. So what this bill is trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is also to still manage and control, train the same directors, which are already been provided for in those statutes. And Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the ICS is of the view that the bill has no utility since regulation of directors fall under different, as I've said, existing laws. And I just want to quote a few, Mr. Speaker, which I don't want to repeat on that. And so that is the first challenge we have on this bill. And Mr. Speaker, this is also what the President actually raised in this memoranda when he returned this bill back to the House. The same comments, Mr. Speaker, was raised by the Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and the same issues were raised by Anjawara and Khan advocates. Just to summarize, Mr. Speaker, submissions by one James Nabanki, and finally by Association of Professional Societies in East Africa. Mr. Speaker, taking into account all these views by the stakeholders who gave their representation during the public participation, Mr. Speaker, my committee, Mr. Speaker, the CHILAC, made the following, and even the AG, Mr. Speaker, let me not avoid to mention what the AG has said. The Attorney General, again, was able to give his view, and he said the bill does not adhere to the established protocols for the establishment of a state corporations. This is because the National Treasury and the State Corporations Advisory Committee have not been consulted. Mr. Speaker, I think the level of consultation, again, when the bill was being passed again, did not, by my able Member of Parliament, Honorable Wamalwa. So all these are the issues, Mr. Speaker, that the conduct of directors of boards in Kenya is already legally regulated by other statutory bodies, such as I've said earlier, Capital Markets Authority, Companies Act, you know, the case of state corporations, and which the President has raised. All this, Mr. Speaker, is what has made this committee to, though accepting and really recognizing the efforts made by Honorable Wamalwa, say that we don't want to legislate in vain, and unless, Mr. Speaker, some of these areas addressed by the mover of the bill, that this committee, Mr. Speaker, found it not advisable. And Mr. Speaker, we want to really plead with this House that even as we come with bills, it is important to consult widely. Look at the relevant statutes that can easily address the issues that you want to raise, the mischiefs you want to deal with in those bills, so that we don't have laws that overlaps and that are already taken into account in our various existing legislations. And so, Mr. Speaker, in part part 4 of our report, Mr. Speaker, which is actually page 25, we were able to outline the reasons why we felt that this bill should not be passed. It should be entirely rejected by the House, Mr. Speaker, for the reasons I've said. Mr. Speaker, that is not to say the ideas that are being raised by Honorable Wamalwa, and indeed by Ocheng, having been the original mover, of this bill, are not relevant. Even in those state corporations, Mr. Speaker, it is required that those directors, Mr. Speaker, are supposed to be trained. They are supposed to undertake their functions as directors in a manner that is professional in performing their duties. Mr. Speaker, there's another issue which I wanted to say as I conclude. We are dealing with both directors of state corporations and directors of private companies, Mr. Speaker. And this law tends to actually, if it was only to deal with directors of private companies, Mr. Speaker, I think this law would really be very, very prudent, because in those private companies, we don't have specific legislation that is able to regulate their functions, the way they do their businesses. You find in private companies, Mr. Speaker, directors actually do their businesses without any regulation. And I think this could be the area to pursue. Where there is a conflict between the State Corporations Act in terms of how directors should work and private companies, I think that is where the divergent position actually arises. And I would want to request Honorable Wamalwa, when the House passes this bill, no problem, because this is really a house of debate, it's out of procedure, we have no problem with that, but we have responsibility as a House and a chair of this committee, Mr. Speaker, to advise the House the outcome of the public participation and the legal position, but I still believe we still have to do something about directors of private companies, which we think they are left, Mr. Speaker, without any regulations. And if we can rewind this to so, Mr. Speaker, I want to appreciate my colleague here and say that that is the reason why the committee felt that this bill should not be passed by this House. But if it is taken the direction of private companies, I think there is justification to have a bill to regulate those directors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Let's have then Honorable Osoro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The earlier indication that you had that I said put the question, it was just an indication that I fully support the bill by Honorable Chris Wamalwa without any form of reservations. Mr. Speaker, there is necessity for us to agree that as a country, we need to equip and strengthen our leadership skills. And Mr. Speaker, you'll agree with me, and just as Honorable Chieng has said, state corporations, specifically state corporations, play a major role in the drive of this country. And the fact that they are very political in appointments clearly shows that we need, at times, they tend to give people without leadership skills or with very, slow or not very well adequate, or rather, not at adequate level of leadership. And at times, a person from the doctorate side, or rather the medicine side, is picked to lead or to be a CEO or a director of an industry in an area that is never learned. Mr. Speaker, this is a challenge that we have in this country. Somebody who's never been in leadership positions at times is rewarded because of the political ties. And I tend to think that the reason why the mover of this bill is pushing for this is just to have this person to be equipped with the leadership skills and the management skills to run a state corporation. There is necessity for us also to look at the entrepreneurial side. We've been telling our young people to create jobs. People create jobs through opening companies, through doing businesses and running, businesses that grow gradually, and they end up leading big companies. Now, before the companies as the companies grow, you'll realize that some of these young people find it as a challenge, or rather get a bit of a challenge to grow them or to grow their leadership skills in terms of management. The Institute of Directors of Kenya, in my opinion, will come into play for this, Mr. Speaker. These people will be trained, although it's voluntary. They'll go through some form of training. They'll go through some form of, networking within the people who have been in leadership and be able to learn on how to manage the companies. Because sometimes these companies start very small and grow big with directors who are inexperienced in leadership, directors who've never been, to any leadership positions. And on the private sector, clearly, just as the Honorable Chair for the Legal Affairs has said, clearly on the private sector, this is timely and it's needed. But also in the state corporations, the directors of state corporations need to share ideas across the board. They also need to be trained, on ethical grounds. We've seen directors, being suspended upon being taken to court. And at times, some of these people find themselves in soup or in problems because of lack of leadership skills, lack of know-how on what to do. The technocrats under them approach them, and they're only told to put their hand there or to put a signature there. They end up going to court without knowing what they signed for. So my opinion, Honorable Speaker, is that even these directors require that. They acquire points. Like you acquire some leadership points within a year. You are taught on how to manage people. You are taught on how to manage your line of leadership. You're also taught on how to evade corruption or to avoid some challenges that face you in terms of leadership, so that you are able to run the companies very well. That, in my opinion, is another way of curbing corruption, is another way of instilling ethical values in our state corporations. And in that sense, Honorable Speaker, it is not about micromanaging or coming up with bills or laws that, have already been passed or rather are in place already in other channels. This is an avenue to put these people to, ethical grounds, to put these people to other leadership skill, being acquitted to the technoserve kind of, society that we are facing as at now, Honorable Speaker. So with this, I fully support this, and there is nothing to add, nothing to subtract. We support this bill by Honorable Chris Wamalwa. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Let's have Honorable, not Pokose. Pokose is next. Let's have Yusuf Haji first.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to oppose this bill. Pardon? Okay. I stand to oppose it because much as my brother, Mr. Chris, has done a lot of work, and I'm sure he has very good intentions, but this cannot be admissible if it becomes a law. This is because if it is directors, then there should be qualifications that is going to cut across. If the bill is to be a law, we should have a qualification or some qualifications for all directors in the country. And this cannot be admissible at the end, because I know of companies which are very successful companies in this country today who are run by directors who have never stepped in a classroom. They have never stepped in a classroom. You may call them illiterate, but they have grown their companies from as low as zero to very prominent and highly respected companies in this. And if we institute this and we make it into a law, and we say those directors should have first degree or what, then that cannot work at all. Maybe if it's only for government parastatals and those, but otherwise, in the whole country, this cannot work, because there are directors who have no basic qualifications, but who knows their job, who are doing very well. On the other hand, there is no profession that is where you grow and become a director. If I give an example myself, I have been a director of programs for an international company for 5 years, and my background is I'm an agriculturalist. When I vacated that position, it was given to a social scientist, and later it was given to a lawyer, the same position, which means that there is no specific professions that can be developed to grow into directors. By the time people are being appointed as directors, I think the background checks have been done, their efficiency have been known, their integrity have been questioned and verified very well, and therefore, anybody with that efficiency, with that integrity, with that experience can fit in a director depending on which business or which institutions that the director is required for. Therefore, by encompassing all directors under one institute and coming up with a specific qualification for directors in Kenya, this is going to restrict people who are already directors, companies that are coming on their own without any qualifications, people who are doing very well in building this nation's economy without those basic qualifications that we are going to put in place maybe if we make this into a law. And therefore, from my point of view, this is not admissible and it should be dropped in totality. Thank you.
This is Honorable Bukose.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for allowing me to contribute. I want to thank the Honorable Chris Wamalwa and Honorable Cheng for coming up with this bill. My understanding, Honorable Speaker, is that when we talk of an institute of directors of Kenya Bill, we are talking of an institution that will be able to bring together all the directors in such a way that they can be able to improve on their skills. Directors have different diverse qualifications. They have different experiences. You have directors who have even not gone to school. But by being a membership to this institute, they are able to at least improve on their skills. So that is what I am looking at it from this, that we create an institute that can sit together and through diverse experience, they can be able to improve on the skills, efficiency, and operationalization of the various directors, whether they are in private or in government. Honorable Speaker, you can have directors. I think those opposing, and even I think the chair of the legal, he seemed not to have even understood, because I expected him from a lawyer's experience and the lawyers who are sitting in that committee to see how do we improve on this in terms of even the Companies Act, how they are going to assist the various parastatals in government. Because when government appoints, the president appoints various members to the various directorship within the various parastatals. Let's say, assume, can it be Kenya Pipeline, can it be REREC, can it be Energy Regulatory, EBRA, and all this. They're bringing in people with diverse experience, whether you are, others are lawyers, others are doctors, others are engineers, others, all from all sorts, others are even politicians with diverse political experience. So by bringing these people together, I think it's a question of how do we enhance what these people have for us to better delivery. So I think my request to the Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs is to look at how do we improve on this bill without necessarily undermining the other corporations or the other parastatals or even the private sector. And I want to, my honorable colleague who has just spoken, it is good anybody can be a director without any experience. You start your company or you are even appointed to a company, you've even explained that you are an agriculturalist. The other person who was appointed after two is a lawyer, the other one is an engineer. All these people have diverse experiences. And with these experiences, we want to bring it on board so that we can see how best, because the mwananchi that these companies are serving is not specific. It's like the way you have counties and you have the national government. There are no people that belong to the national government and there are no people that belong to the county government. All Kenyans are served. It's only the service that the county government now has this service, that the county government can now be able to look at in the Schedule 4 what are their functions that they have been given, and they can be able to improve on those services so that they can better deliver good services to the Mwananchi. And the national government with its resources still delivers to the Mwananchi, but with a bigger mandate in terms of what they are able to do and the resources they have. So these are issues that I think, to me, my understanding of this bill is addressing it, such that when we move now into the committee of the whole house, how do we look at the various amendments that we can be able to bring to make sure that this institute of directors better performs and does not conflict with the functions of the directors, whether in parastatals or in government. So with those few remarks, I support.
Honorable Mwirigi. Oh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to earn my voice in this bill. First and foremost, I would like to thank His Honorable Eugene for bringing this bill to this House. Mr. Speaker, according to Chris Wamalwa, I'm sorry, Mheshimiwa Chris. Mr. Speaker, to my understanding, when this Institute of Directors, Mr. Speaker, will be put in place, it will assist a lot, since most of the directors who are appointed, Mr. Speaker, most of them, they are not conversant with the job which they are given and the corporate which they lead. So, Mr. Speaker, when we will have this institute in place, it will help to shape the skills of these directors and even the community as all, Mr. Speaker. Their interests will be well catered for, since according to the management and the functions, how they are supposed to work, Mr. Speaker, they are well stated how they can, how their functions will be according to the institute which will be incorporated. And the service of this institute, Mr. Speaker, is not that long according to the bill, Mr. Speaker. Since a director and the 7 members, Mr. Speaker, are supposed to be serving for a period of 3 years, which as a reappointment reappointment, Mr. Speaker, and the director of this board, Mr. Speaker, according to the bill, is a person or somebody who is appointed with by His Excellency the President. So, Mr. Speaker, it is good for this House to support this bill, so that all the directors who will be appointed in the future, Mr. Speaker, they can have an institute where they can be equipped with skills to do the managerial work, Mr. Speaker, and which will help, Mr. Speaker, to straight that all the corporate or all the organizations, Mr. Speaker, run well according to their mandate, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, according to the expectations of the entire community and the office which these directors own, Mr. Speaker, it will help them. Whereby, if you are given a certain docket and you are not trained to take that docket, Mr. Speaker, you know exactly what you are supposed to do, and nobody who can influence you when you are undertaking your mandate. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a good bill, and I would like to urge the whole House to support this bill, since the directors, because we have the private directors, Mr. Speaker, and from my point of view, Mr. Speaker, from these private private directors, Mr. Speaker, some of them maybe may have may not have that skills or may not have the academic qualification, but they are directors, Mr. Speaker. But this institute, Mr. Speaker, will help them to equip themselves with right skills, Mr. Speaker. So it is a good bill, Mr. Speaker, and I beg to support. Thank you.
Very well. And before I give the next member, let me recognize in the speakers gallery students from Concord Girls High School, Ainapkoi constituency of Uasin Gishu, that constituency represented by Honorable Chepkut. We also have in the public gallery pupils from Kaiti SEK Primary School, from Kaiti constituency, Makueni. Yes, that must be the one represented by Honorable Zambia. Then pupils from Dhimbigwa Primary School. I do not know if it is Dhimbigwa or Dhindigwa Primary School of Kiamba, Kiambu. And again, we have pupils from Berurga Academy, Kuresoi South of Nakuru County, represented by Honorable Joseph Tanui. The next member to contribute on this one will be Honorable Mogaka Kemosi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to also contribute to this bill. Mr. Speaker, my understanding of this bill is to have all the directors both in the private sector and also in the private sector brought to one institute so that this institute is able to regulate their functions. Mr. Speaker, I have reservations on this particular bill, more particularly, Mr. Speaker, on the definition of who a director is. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of that clear definition, I have looked at this bill and more particularly section 6, where they have said the functions of the institute, among them being a professionally competent body to regulate the conduct of directors, as well as training of the directors, and also providing continuous training programs for the members who are directors, as well as providing for professional practice directors. Mr. Speaker, I also want to associate myself with the statements of Honorable Aji, who particularly said we should not assume that the issue of directors is a professional body which has some sort of practice. Mr. Speaker, even the village where I come from, deep in the villages of West Mugrango, we have some people who have gone and registered their companies and are directors of different entities. Some of the people or some of the Kenyans who have registered their entities or companies, they have not been able to go to school. And these people have formed companies where they are directors, and their main business is to get opportunities so that they can do business. Now, an institute is being brought up to regulate, to train them continuously, and issue a certificate of competence. My reservations, my Honorable Speaker, could be where a certificate of competence is issued, and in the absence of some members attending, they may be hindered to do their business, hence to post themselves. If this bill, Mr. Speaker, was tailored to the public entities, then it could make sense. If it was meant to regulate, to train the directors in private entities, it will make sense. But where it has come now generally, trying to regulate both the directors of private and public entities, I do have reservations, and I do propose that it could have been better that the definition of a director is given, so that we are not going to kill small entrepreneurs who intend to register their companies so that to do business. From the onset, Mr. Speaker, I want to express my reservations, And I propose that if we can be able to do amendment, I will support. But the way the bill is today, Mr. Speaker, I stand to oppose the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next is Honorable Iringo Kubai, member for Igembe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this bill. And Mr. Speaker, from the onset, let me thank Honorable Ochieng, who originated this bill in the last parliament, and it went through the process and up to the presidential asset for signing by the president. And the bill came back again, and let me thank Honorable Wamalwa for making sure that it doesn't die. And he went through he made the necessary amendments, and that is why we have this bill with us here today. And I personally feel I need to support this bill because sometimes you find our parastatals, Mr. Speaker, being run by people who are really not really competent enough. And at the end of the day, you find them crumbling or going under, or you see a lot of misappropriation of funds, and not because anybody is ready to, presence over it, but because of the ignorance of the office bearers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, most of our parastatals are done by people who are appointed maybe politically, and sometimes they might not be having the necessary qualification to run those institutions, but because of that they are close to the powers that be, most of the time you find them now getting to those positions, and when they get to those positions, they go down to work with the CEOs who are very smart, who are clever than them, and when they sit in the board, they don't make any decisions, but they just become rubber stamps to confirm whatever has been decided by the board. And in the long run, it ends up being a one-man show in the institution, and if things go wrong, the board will just start blaming one another without knowing that it is the ignorance which caused the problem, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I support the bill because it is establishing a board to run the institute, which has given good qualifications for the people to run the institute, especially the executive director, who has to be appointed by the president, and more so giving very high standards of qualification. Because it will be like just a college to at least improve the quality of service in our public sector, in the parastatals and the state corporations, Mr. Speaker, so that if one is appointed a director, you go there for refresher courses, for extra training, so that at least you can earn the skills which are capable of running that institution. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted here that it will be the board which will be vetting those who need to be, who wants to join the institute, so that even the board should make sure that those who want to join the institute with a view of wanting to be appointed as a director in a certain institute is somebody who is going to be qualified to do that job. Because even if we are to appoint anybody and you want to do it, even in a friendly manner, you must at least be able to you must be able to qualify to work in that institution. Mr. Speaker, this vetting should be very, very thorough for these members, and the more so that the institute should have a curriculum. Even those who are already performing or in leadership in the various institutions, there should be some refresher courses after a while to take them back. We have seen many institutions, Mr. Speaker, going under in this country. We have seen many institutions which have crumbled and collapsed in this country, Mr. Speaker. And at the end of the day, we find that the board directors are sacked, and if they are not sacked, they are taken to court. We don't know how long the cases will go, but already the beans have already been spilled. Already the milk is already spilled, and therefore we live to regret. Why did we not get the correct person for that institution? Therefore, I believe this, with this particular institute, which will be tailoring directors in this country, Mr. Speaker, will have the claws and the teeth and the muscle to make sure that we streamline whatever issues we have teething problems in our parastatals. We have the CPAs, the certified public accountants. They have their body, they have their own disciplinary action. We have the Law Society of Kenya. They have got their own framework on how they handle their members, disciplining them, and also recruiting them. We have got Institute of Architects. They do the same, engineers, and all those. We have got even doctors and many others, Mr. Speaker. They have even people who aspire to be directors in our institutions in this country. They also need to have their own school and their own body, which tailors them to handle the very serious jobs they are given to manage the subsector of our economy, which is which carries a lot of potential, either in human resource and also productivity to our GDP. And at the end of the day, in the process, we will just improve our economy, improve our service rendering, and that is how people will endear themselves to the public. I support, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Gogo Ochieng. Not interested, so I will give Honorable Amaua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance also to
You
air.
are busy, you are busy, Honorable Gogo, so as soon as she finishes, then you will be next.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker.
Honorable Maua, you are on the floor.
Not yet.
There you go.
Thank you, Speaker, sir, for giving me this chance also to contribute to this bill. First of all, I want to congratulate the owner of the bill, who is a member of my committee, the PIAC, Honorable Chris Wamarwa. Mr. Speaker, sir, the bill establishes the Institute of Directors of Kenya. And I tend to think the Institute will also be issuing certificate of registration to its members annually as a form of quality assurance to the public bodies, entities, enterprises, and companies. But as much as I appreciate the work that has been done by the honorable member on this bill, Mr. Speaker, I also have my own reservation. Mr. Speaker, going by the proposal that had been brought by the Committee on Legal Affairs, there are some fears on this House approving the bill the way it is, Mr. Speaker. And because I know this is a House of record, Mr. Speaker, there's nothing wrong with it taking a bit of some time, and with all the lawyers that we have, and especially with the Committee of the Legal Affairs, looking at all the spirit of the bill so that we do not conflict on any existing law that regulate on the conduct of directors in other laws like the Company Act, the Capital Market Authority, and others, because, Mr. Speaker, we stand guided. Mr. Speaker, I also want to support my colleagues here who have also said we would want to see the definition of director so that we do not kill other small companies that are starting in the name of businesses where we have members being directors and they've not gone to school. And many of these companies, Mr. Speaker, are very successful. Mr. Speaker, when a company is started, the individuals forming the company, automatically they become founding directors. And even when the company grows, they never ceases to be founding directors. And when now the issue of standard qualification and appointment comes, according to the requirement of the corporate and other acts stipulated, might be a bit misleading, and we might kill the spirit of some of these small companies that are being started by people who never stepped in a class, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, that is why I'm joining my colleagues to say we really need to look at this bill that is bringing the institute so that we can be fair and we do not even bring confusion to any other existing laws that we have, because we know the Company Act is also guiding us on the issue of directors and also the Capital Market Authority. Mr. Speaker, sir, I also know that there exists a non-governmental institute of director in Kenya that was established in the year 2004 that provide knowledge. It also support in the networking, and it also gives mentorship to prospective and acting directors, Mr. Speaker, sir. And we also have very key corporate leaders such as the Dr. Peter Muthoka, who in the year 2017 was appointed as the Chancellor of Masida Mulilo University of Science and Technology. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, instead there be a policy, I think that would be a bit better, if not a policy to guide on the deficit of what we have and what we intend that is lacking in the acts that we have, Mr. Speaker, then we can have a bit of some time taken, if the honorable member may so agree, so that we do not come out with a bill that may conflict or that may bring maybe other members outside, members of the public, taking us to court because whatever we have is conflicting on another existing law. Mr. Speaker, I know the honorable member Chris is an outgoing person, is very figure, so we support whatever he has, although we are saying let us take a bit of some time so that we scrutinize properly, so that we do not go against what is existing and we do not also kill the morale of other small companies that are started by people who have not gone to class, yet we know these companies are doing very well when it comes to issues of qualification. Mr. Speaker, that is my contribution, and I think if we go that way, I think we shall also be assisting, because we can see he's out to make sure we reach for more and we help in whatever we are doing as far as the management of our directors in our companies is concerned. Thank you.
Very well. Before I give to Honorable Gogo Cheng, allow me to recognize at the Speaker's Gallery, Nyangati Secondary School from Mwea constituency, Kirinyaga County. They are welcome to follow the proceedings of the National Assembly. Honorable Gogo Cheng.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this chance to contribute to this very, very noble item that has been brought by my friend and honorable member, Chris. I rise, Honorable Speaker, to support the agenda to bring up an institute of directors. Directors are very important persons, especially when it comes to management and running of institutions. And it cuts across the board because directors they work in private institutions as well as in our government systems. But what makes me really want to put a lot of emphasis on my support for this particular motion is the need that has been put that it is voluntary, it requires voluntary membership, or it would require that one volunteers without being coerced. But that would also make it be known to us that where we have such institutes, we have several institutes for other disciplines. We have Institute of Food Technologies. We have institutes for other areas of practice in this country. And where such exist, we have high performance of boards. If we have an institute of directors, the board of directors would have their performance essentially grow and improve depending on the particular skills and training that they would get from that kind of an institution if it is put in law and if it is well documented and run properly. Institute of Directors would stand for free enterprise, entrepreneurism, wealth creation, and good corporate governance. And when it comes to good corporate governance, we have had our country go through a lot of pain, especially in the issue of corruption. And if you would instill, especially if we were to have members join certain institutes, like if they were to join this particular Institute of Directors, I believe this is the point where we are still going to insist on training against practices that kind of uphold corruption. So I think this would be very important at the point where our country has reached, and it would be a good idea if we give this particular motion the support that it requires. I'm also bringing it extremely down to market-driven courses that such an institute would offer. We have the management of our learning institutions and even our basic education systems. We have boards of managers in our high schools. And boards of managers are given a tenure period of, I think, 2 years or should be about 2 years. And most of the people that are put to run or manage our schools, some of them they lack basic skills. So if we were to have this particular institute in place and guarded by law, then I think it would be important to probably offer necessary skills that are required to train even people who are running our schools as boards of managers. When it comes to looking at the opportunities for manpower development, Institute of Directors would look at best practices that they would instill in the particular members or people who go for their training, and would also borrow and would also benchmark with other places where success has been done, and especially this can be found in the UK and especially also in South Africa. So I would want to support what my honorable member has brought forth. And many times, as I've mentioned before, our systems and our institutions are suffering corruption because of inadequacy of certain boards. So it would be important to have these boards evaluate, the Institute of Directors evaluate the performance of the boards that have already been put in place, identify weaknesses of these boards, if any, and provide the necessary training and skills that would bring about better management practices and better practices for running our institutions. And also, when it comes to the promotion of good governance, I believe we have had situations where our institutions go under for the simple reason that the oversight role is not done well. So if we were to have this particular institution in place, the board of directors, I think it's going to mitigate on many of these problems that we face as a country. So I'm supporting this particular motion that has been brought, Honorable Speaker, and I would also request that colleagues support this work, because this work had already been brought and it had been debated upon, gone through the systems, and as it has come back to the floor of the House through another member, that's a sure indication that there is need for this particular Institute of Directors. So I rise to support Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much.
Shall we have Honorable Koi Waruke, member for Sirisia?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I rise to support this bill, the Institute of, to train the directors, Mr. Speaker, for this issue of management of directors in any institution. This is a very important bill, and I want to thank Honorable Amalwa for bringing this. Mr. Speaker, directors of any institution, be it a company or a parastatal, they are very important people, Mr. Speaker, in any institution. And we need to put good laws that can govern those directors, Mr. Speaker, for good management for the institution in this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been having directors in several companies or different companies, Mr. Speaker. But some, Mr. Speaker, have not been trained to know their role properly. And I think this bill that Honorable Amalwa has brought, Mr. Speaker, is going to make some good progress and changes on these directors, Mr. Speaker, in these institutions that Honorable Amalwa has brought. Mr. Speaker, good governance in any institution is needed. We talk of corruption, Mr. Speaker, that you get some directors are involved in mismanagement of the institution, mismanagement of the resources, Mr. Speaker, and it is not their wish sometimes, Mr. Speaker, maybe because they have not been trained. But if we have a proper training for them, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure they will know their role, and also they will contribute better for their institution and for the country at large, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for those few remarks, I support.
My left now, Honorable Osotsi Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to contribute to this.
Just before Honorable Sotsi, allow me to recognize this school at the visitors, at the public gallery, Migwani AIC Primary, from Mwingi West Constituency, Kitui County. They are welcome. Honorable Sotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this important opportunity to contribute to this very, very, very important bill. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I want to say that I fully support this bill. And I also want to say that this bill is long overdue. I have had my colleagues who are having reservations about this bill, but I want to say that this parliament, if we want to be remembered as a progressive parliament, this is one of the bills that we need to pass. And I'm saying this because I have heard what the other colleagues have said. But if we want to deal with the problem of corporate governance in this country, this is the bill that we need to pass. Because most of the challenges we are having with our organization, whether they are private organization or a public organization, is the issue of corporate governance. And corporate governance is everything. I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, that the Institute of Directors, it is not just a phenomenon in this country. Almost every country in this world has an Institute of Directors, which exists as a non-profit making organization or a government sponsored organization. As we are talking now, Mr. Speaker, several countries in Africa have come up with a national code or legislation on matters of corporate governance. Mauritius, Malawi, Zimbabwe. And as we are talking now, Nigeria is also coming up with a national code or a legislation on issues of how to regulate directors. So I am surprised that some of my colleagues here are opposing this wonderful idea of having a bill that will regulate our directors. And Mr. Speaker, in management, we are taught a concept called agency theory. Agency theory basically defines the relationship between the principals and the agents in an organization. The principals in a private institution are the shareholders. In a public institution are taxpayers. The agents are employees, they are suppliers, they are management, and all that. There is always a competing interest between the principals and the agents. And therefore, corporate governance exists to ensure that all this relationship is done in a proper manner so that the principals gain from the organization. And we have seen so many companies in this country collapse because of lack of proper corporate governance. And we have it in our reports. We discuss them all the time. So this is the bill that we need to pass. And Mr. Speaker, even internationally, as we are speaking now, the African Union and even Economic Commission for Africa has identified a strong linkage between good corporate governance and economic development. So by opposing this bill, we'll actually be going backwards instead of moving forward as a country. As I said, several other countries, even South Africa, they have a private sector-driven corporate governance framework that is recognized by the state. So this is an opportunity. There could be a few issues in this bill, which I'm sure we are going to look at when we go to the committee of the whole house. But we cannot throw this bill out on the basis that it is conflicting with other legislation. And those who are saying that, they have not given a specific legislation that are in conflict with this bill. In any case, even the Company Act, Section 172 of the Company Act, defines the duties of a director of a company. But it does not provide mechanism of enforcing it. Now, this bill will provide that mechanism of enforcing what is in the Company Act in terms of duties of directors. Mr. Speaker, also, when we talk about corporate governance, we are also talking about issues of taxation. If we fix corporate governance in our organization, we will be able to get enough resources through taxation. Because we are losing a lot of taxation resources because of poor corporate governance in our organization. We are also talking about even issues of IT governance, which is a real issue. Issues of cybercrime, issues of data protection. Now, this bill, if we have directors who understand what corporate governance mean and what issues of IT governance mean, then we'll be able to deal with some of the challenges we've been having. Mr. Speaker, I fully support this bill, and I want to encourage members to also support this bill, because this bill is in line with the best practice globally. In fact, at the moment, Mr. Speaker, there is a huge shift in corporate governance. Instead of focusing on short-term profit, we are talking about inclusive capitalism, issues of social corporate responsibility. These are issues that this country must deal with. We are also talking about, instead of talking about silo reporting is where we focus too much on financial reporting, that we want to see the financial report of an organization. We need to start focusing on integrated reporting. And that is what modern corporate governance says. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a very, very important piece of legislation. Small issues which I have personally identified and members have talked about can be corrected at the committee of the whole House. But let us pass this bill as it is, and then we deal with those issues at the committee of the whole House. Thank you. I support this bill.
Honorable Ashira Kabinga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to contribute to this bill. And even I do so, I want to also recognize the presence of one of my schools, Nyangati Secondary School, for the benefit of the House. If you look at the Speaker's gallery on top, you see those beautiful girls and boys. They are products of the best rice in Africa, coming from Mwea constituency, Mr. Speaker. So I'll also be expecting Kagio boys to also get in later on. Mr. Speaker, I want to support this particular bill, but also with some reservations, with the hope that when we go to the committee of the whole House, we'll have cleared most of the issues that have been raised by members, Mr. Speaker. I've listened to the mover, who happens to be my mentor in matters parliament, and also the seconder, Mr. Honorable Chieng. I've also listened to those that have reservations, and Mr. Speaker, I also want to support, but also with some reservation. Mr. Speaker, such an institute of directors is not new to the world. In UK, Mr. Speaker, the Institute of Directors was formed in 1903. It's a membership of company directors, membership of senior business leaders, as well as entrepreneurs. That company was incorporated by the Royal Charter in UK in 1906, Mr. Speaker. And it's unfortunate that we are discussing it in Kenya many, many years after it was formed in the UK. Mr. Speaker, I think the main issue here is the definition of the term directors. And I find most of us having problems when you try to relate this particular bill to only public directors that are appointed by the executive, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think this is the purpose of this bill, to focus on one particular area. Mr. Speaker, whereas the public institutions have particular laws and regulations that guard and guide them, Mr. Speaker, the rest of the sector, and especially the private sector, and I'm persuaded that that is the sector that actually has a lot to do with our economy. The small companies out there that are formed by people who come up as entrepreneurs, not necessarily having gone to the university or gone to higher levels of education, but are proving to be very successful in that particular area, Mr. Speaker, starting very small companies, growing them with the little knowledge that they have, providing leadership to the managers in those companies. And I want to make a note that there is a great difference between managers and leaders. Most of these entrepreneurs end up in being leaders who carry the vision of the companies that they form, Mr. Speaker. But as the world is growing, a lot is also changing, and there is need for an institution that will continually provide capacity building to such entrepreneurs, Mr. Speaker. We have seen in this country companies that have come up very well from the very beginning, including banks, including cooperative societies, including small companies that have come up very well. But somewhere along the line, because of lack of proper corporate governance, some of these companies have ended up in going under receivership, Mr. Speaker. They have gone under with the public funds. They have gone under in a way such that the owners or the entrepreneurs, the originators, have ended up in jail, Mr. Speaker. And what this institute is coming to offer. And I want our colleagues to note very carefully that this institute is not coming to regulate the appointment of directors into institutions. It's not coming to regulate the knowledge that is expected to be possessed by entrepreneurs, Mr. Speaker. This institute is coming to capacity build those entrepreneurs, those public directors that have already been appointed, so that tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, an entrepreneur will be able to embrace good governance, to separate business investment with family business, Mr. Speaker, so that even as they allow their managers to learn those companies, they are providing the bigger picture of those companies. They are there to provide guidance on how the vision that they had initially is to be carried forward, so that these entrepreneurs and these directors, Mr. Speaker, may not tomorrow start diverting resources into unplanned activities that end up, Mr. Speaker, in freezing their original companies and ending their vision because of other plans that come alongside the way, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I want to urge the originator of this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, to sit with the Legal Affairs team or committee to ensure that as we enter into the committee of full house, Mr. Speaker, we may be able to thrash out some of the areas that seem to be conflicting or bringing confusion, especially on the public institutions that are guided by the Public Act that forms those institutions, Mr. Speaker, so that even as this bill goes to the President for assent, Mr. Speaker, those fears may be addressed. Otherwise, we do not want to lose this very, very important bill that is going to look at an area that has been forgotten. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, every part of our economy here has a term director in it. And those are the people we are targeting so that our economy can continue growing. These are the people we are saying for a long time, they have been left on their own. As an entrepreneur, Mr. Speaker, I've found myself in many cases left alone to make decisions that I could have probably made in a better way by networking with other directors that are in different areas. And so this institute is just bringing together these directors so that they can also share ideas, look at the challenges, look at the areas that require improvement, so that the institute can come up with standards that would help these directors wherever they are, Mr. Speaker. And for this reason, I really want to support this bill, but also urge the mover to sit with Legal Affairs and other helpful committees so that we can strengthen it as we go to the committee of the full house, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Very well. Before I give to Honorable Tum Chebet, let's have to my left Honorable Wanyonyi Kevin, member for Kwanza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. And on the very, very onset, I want to support this bill by Honorable Chris Omalwa. And this bill should have not come, it has come the right time. Mr. Speaker, it's important, as well explained by most members who understand what this bill is about. And of course, there are those with reservations. We accept their reservations of the same. But Mr. Speaker, the most and first and foremost, the bill, the ultimate goal and the objective of this bill is to be able to have directors not necessarily qualified for those particular fields. A director could be a medical doctor, could be anything. But in terms of the governance of that particular parastatal, and we've seen so many parastatals, Mr. Speaker, going under. You can name them. I don't want to name them, but you can name some of the parastatals that actually have gone under because of mismanagement. And all the bill is trying to do is to get people trained so that we know for sure for the good governance of that particular parastatal, the vision and mission of that particular parastatal, the objective of that particular parastatal. Of course, the corporate governance of that particular parastatal. We need to have people who understand the mission and vision for that particular parastatal to be able to move. He could be a teacher, he could be a farmer, he could be anything. But we need to have refresher courses for people going to be appointed for that particular, because some people are now saying maybe even the president may not be able to appoint so and so because, you know, is not a problem. No, we are saying that the president can even appoint the directors from the pool of those directors to be able to run that particular parastatal. We've had problems, Mr. Speaker, where I personally, when I was a director of a parastatal, I don't want to say two parastatal companies here in this country, Mr. Speaker, I had a problem. We had people appointed to that as directors. And, you know, you find he's not even sure what he's doing. He just comes here to get the allowance and goes away. But this particular bill now will be able to have people who are appointed or those who have gone through the same system understand why they are in that particular parastatal. We have had, for example, a very good example, Kenya Meat Commission. It's a very good practical example here, Kenya Meat Commission. And my history tells me that even in Namibia learned from us. Our people went to Namibia and what have you. Today, we are going to Namibia to do benchmarking, which actually is the other way around. We've had cases where people go to parastatal, and because they don't know what they are doing, and all I've seen is, of course, diverting the resources, the bigger resources of the government for something else. So I think this bill has come at the right time, and I think we should support it because then we'll be able to have some of these problems we've been having actually be done away with. I had, as somebody mentioned, the previous speaker, I had a chance to go to UK and attended a three-day seminar in one of these directors' institute, and I can tell you, you can look at what they are doing. And by the time I came, you know, when you talk to the directors about the same thing, a man says, no, but you see, this is not what I came to do here. So this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, will be able to assist us and be able to have our people trained so that what we are seeing, the corruption we are seeing in this country, the mismanagement of the resources of this country, the economic growth of this country, the unemployment we have in this country will be something of the past. So let's actually support this bill so that people can be trained or at least can be exposed to the good governance and corporate policies of various companies or parastatals to be able to have the economic growth of this country. Today, this country is doing very badly economically. Look at the employment. The Speaker, is regrettable. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of youths finishing university and they go on the street, and one particular case about 2 weeks ago where somebody, a child, had first-class honors and cannot be able to get a job. And of course, after the exposure by I think one of the media houses, he was called to join one of the banks here. But how many of our youths have left university and have no jobs? Just because we have the resources, we have the money, but matter of governance has been a biggest problem in this country. People mismanaging companies and whatever parastatals, and most of them have gone under. So let's actually take this bill very seriously so that at the third reading, we should be able to actually correct, those who have got reservations, can correct some of the aspects that are in this bill. But let's support it, and I think I urge members of this House to support this bill. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Shall we have Honorable Tum Chebet?
Honorable Speaker, I stand to support this motion on establishment of an institute of directors in Kenya. And let me take this opportunity to convey my condolence and that of the people of Nandi to the residents of Bomet County and the constituents of Kibra on the passing on of Governor Lois Laposo and Ken Okod. At this particular time of morning, I wish them a peaceful morning, and may the Lord take charge. On the said bill, there is need to enhance service delivery in our institutions in Kenya. The directors who are working in our corporations should be trained in business management, corporate governance, and leadership, so that they run the affairs of our institutions well. Some can be engaged and they are not trained. So there is need for financial management in our institutions, and the directors should be the first people to have knowledge on financial management so that we can avoid the issue of corruption in our institutions. Another issue, there is need for the managers to have all knowledge in all areas of managing our institutions. In Kenya, we need to kill the menace of corruption. So the only way is to have our managers trained. There is need for effective and efficient management of our corporate institutions in Kenya. We know very well we have the Kenya Institute of Management, but it is not having the required to deal with all the corporations in the entire nation. So there is need of establishing other corporations. So I support this motion. Thank you.
Very well. Shall we have Honorable Mutua Balasa, member for Kimilili? Is that member present? Yes.
Yes,
or you had relocated?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for
You have the
giving
floor.
me. Yes, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to also contribute on this bill. And I want to say from the very onset that I support this bill. Of course, I have some reservations which I'll bring them during the time of the committee of the whole House. Honorable Speaker, I just want to be on record that there are two things that members have been talking about. Some have been talking about this bill improving competency of the directors. Others have been saying that this bill will kind of impart good, industrial practice, things to do with ethics, which I really want to agree with them, Honorable Speaker. But I want to make it clear that you may have a director who not have the good ethics, but is competent, Mr. Speaker. You can have even some people who are also highly competent directors, but they lack ethics. So this bill will kind of bring some good practice in that kind of industry, which is completely now unregulated. But I want also to make it clear that if we will ensure that nobody will be appointed director of a company, or nobody should be a director of a company unless you are a member of this institute, then that one will miss the point, Mr. Speaker, because we have scenario where individual Kenyans will want to form the companies, and I will sit down with the Honorable Chris Wamalwa to refine and make it clear that either after you've become a director of a company, either by forming it or being appointed, then you can voluntarily decide to join the Institute of Directors as a member, and then you will be bound by the decisions of that institute. That is going to make it liberal, even to those members who have fears that maybe this regulator is going even into curtail the interest of those who want to form companies and become directors, that maybe is going to curtail, to tie the hands of authorities in this country who quite oftenly will want to appoint directors to sit on state corporations. So once these things are clarified, Honorable Speaker, then we will be able to move forward. Just the same way that we have the Institute of Engineers of Kenya, where at least they don't really guide you on who to employ as an engineer. But those engineers who joins them, then we have some basic privileges and advantages in terms of training, in terms of institutes having a clear peace of mind that they have engaged a competent person who is a member of a professional body. So this Institute of Directors, Honorable Speaker, is going to redefine and provide a new meaning, a new way of doing things by directors, even by providing, training opportunities, by providing, the minimum basic industrial professional practice by these directors, because you will agree with me, Honorable Speaker, that corporations, the far the corporations goes in terms of corporate management depends on the competency of directors. So this Institute of Directors, I think if we refine this bill, and I know we have an opportunity to do so at the Committee of the Whole House, this is going to be a game changer in terms of corporate governance, in terms of even business startups, because we have very many people in this country who have begun small companies, but those companies don't live to see the light of the day because of lack of very basic management. And this is going to take this country forward, Honorable Speaker. With these few remarks, I support this bill. Thank you.
Honorable John Bunyasi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I rise to support this bill. The few remarks I'd like to make. Mr. Speaker, sir, it's, I've been listening to the discussion from the beginning this morning and was wondering what the major thrust of the bill was and also what the major thrust of the debate was. It has helped me to form my remarks. Mr. Speaker, sir, this would have applied ideally in the first place to public institutions and would have left the private sector to their own wits to start with. But as I thought more about that, I said, but there's so much that even of private institutions is expected, that is expected of the private institutions. For instance, compliance with the tax laws, compliance with the environmental laws, compliance with no loss policy, no harm policy to wananchi. So there are many, many dimensions that I think a directorship, even a private one, ought to comply with. If you're trading in cattle or camels and so on, for example, you still must be fully aware as directors what your company's impact is on the environment. And you would hopefully, through that knowledge and legal obligation, begin to comply as you make internal private decisions. Indeed, people can form companies without formal education, but it doesn't mean they're uninformed. Uneducated and not necessarily uninformed, but generally it would be a little perverse if, in fact, the completely literate had better knowledge of running companies than the educated. You know, that would mean really the value of incremental education is almost is worth nothing. So I think there is usually a level at which certain minimum knowledge is required. I support this bill by saying that in whatever roles they play in public institutions or private institutions, there is an obligation inherent in what they do, insofar as, for example, they have to meet the national obligations on taxation, clearly understand the tax laws, and so on. I know that these are embedded in the Companies Act and the rest of it. And I don't know, members of this House, any of them who saw the latest version of the Companies Act. It's about 6 inches high. So if you assume that people understand that, I think then you'll be in that category which believes that ignorance of the law is no defense. But we are talking about knowledge of the law as a defense to carry out social objectives of any country. Whether these people be sitting
in a private institution or public institution. So I support this process. I think that we would have a cadre of people. Now let me talk first about the public institutions. We would have a cadre of people that are going to take good care of the resources, the public resources that are entrusted to parastatals and other public institutions. The Speaker, sir, we talk about issues of graft. We have been focusing a lot on what comes out of central government direct departments and what comes out of counties. But we have a lot of parastatals out there doing their own thing that nobody ever knows. They never surface. They never rise to the surface. They make lots of money. They sit on lots of assets that are, which assets are every day being snatched, as you may say that. We use the word grabbing land, grabbing this, grabbing that. You saw how much we lost, perhaps we have now forgotten, when we moved over from local authorities to county governments. If we had knowledge of people who understand the various public laws that deal with areas of trust that is given to directors, at the minimum, they would probably have indicated what should or should not be done. Mr. Speaker, I think that abstracting from what each one knows when they're a director in a company and just focusing on what it means, what that means for you who is sitting to direct affairs of an institution, is a way of taking from the broad knowledge of things just that element that you need to guide and to direct, whether you're a family institution or you're in a public institution. What I would say, though, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that it should be compulsory for all of the directors in public institutions. It should be advisable and desirable for all of those that are in private institutions. And if you cross over from private institutions to public institutions, you should go through this kind of training or certification, however you call it. It could be a week, could be a month. I don't know what that's going to be. I know there were some timelines being mentioned, but it's terribly important. They do. And we know what happens in private institutions. They may be truly making profits, and maybe that's not all we are looking for in the public institutions. We have to look at the compliance to the law. We have to look at the harm to the environment and to nature and the environment. It's not just that you have turned in profit like the private companies do, unless they're caught by one of the laws that exists. So what we are saying, even the oversight that requires compliance and oversight would be enhanced if these people had a chance to go through this awareness type of familiarization. And it's relevant whether, no matter how highly educated you are, it does not mean that you have a grasp of what's required to guide institutions where you sit. Mr. Speaker, sir, with those few remarks, I want to add and just reiterate that I think it's really important that we allow an institution of this nature, even if it is co-secretariat and it is oversight and trustees will not be full-time, it doesn't matter. But we ought to have one where people are able to go through this formation before they take charge of public institutions. And that formation while they take charge of private institutions, so that perhaps the social, economic, and environmental harm done by private institutions to the economy would then be minimized. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support.
Next is Honorable Tuitoek Kamuren, member for Mogotio.
I'd like to contribute to on this particular bill concerning the Institute of Directors. The bill is in itself very noble. I would like to say that I'm in total agreement that we need an institute in which it can guide and can also be used to prepare our directors to provide service for both private and public sector. Currently, when directors of the public sector are appointed, they are actually normally taken by state corporation, SCAC, for training on Mwongozo. The Mwongozo is the guideline in which the directors or the state or governance, to provide governance in various government agencies. But I'm sure this particular bill is to encompass both the private and the public sector. Looking at the functions of this particular institute, I'm totally in agreement with most of the functions which are actually outlined here, specifically on the issue of the
maintaining and improving the standards and professional competence and conduct of directors, especially the ethics part of it. The ethical conduct of directors is very important, and therefore the setting up of this institution is to support and to enhance the effectiveness of these directors. Of course, I'm sure that the curriculum will be a bit diverse, noting that even private individuals set up their own companies. They set up their own companies, and maybe they have different level of education, and we may need to set up a curriculum in which we encompass different level of capacities of directors. Those who have less education, up to those who have actually highly trained, but then specifically on the role of governance in these institutions. I have reservations, however, Mr. Speaker, on the aspect of the role of the board, that the board is meant to vet directors who can be fit to be directors. To me, I think that particular activity of saying to determine who becomes who goes in the register of directors may not be the proper way to go. And therefore, this particular function of the board in vetting and saying somebody who doesn't meet certain particular qualification should not be allowed to be a member of the institute, maybe something we need to revisit and maybe carry out amendments in that particular aspect. Because mainly this particular institute is supposed to really be used to empower or give more strength in terms of governance to directors, so that even those who are newly appointed, who have never served in various institutions, can then be empowered in various ways to be ready to serve the public or the private sector in terms of giving proper, in terms of policy and strategic planning for those institutions. And therefore, I particularly support this particular bill, but with reservations. Thank you. I beg to support.
Mutunga.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion. Honorable Speaker, I stand to support with reservations this particular bill. Honorable Speaker, any organization that brings sanity to a system is welcome. This bill comes in to look at the directors as they are and try to bring in sense in the group of directors. But Honorable Speaker, I take exception with Section 6 of this particular bill, which talks about regulation and the conduct and screening of these directors. First and foremost, Honorable Speaker, we should be asking ourselves whether directors could fit as an homogeneous group. Directors of various types, various backgrounds, and they are very different. Secondly, the universality of the law needs to be observed here, because the application of the law will not be selective. We are looking at both government and non-governmental companies, or parastatals and companies out there, private companies, which therefore need to be regulated by this particular institute. If the institute came in as a capacity building institute, which will be optional, in other words, it will not be mandatory, it will be obligatory it will be, directors can join at will, then the law may have may not have that particular problem. But the problem we foresee here is, first of all, Kenya as a country does not have sufficient capacity to employ many people, and therefore we encourage people to get into businesses. And we do not choose. There are no standard procedures for choosing which business people should get into, so companies will evolve without any kind of condition. They will evolve voluntarily. That being the case, then we need to look at, when we talk about the conduct of the directors and the vetting of these directors, first of all, encourage the people to form these companies. And then we do not have limitations on the education levels or limitations in terms of profession. Then, having such a group being put under some regulations is something that needs to be thought through very seriously, and I believe during the committee of the whole House, we will need to look at that. Honorable Speaker, this particular provisions within this bill might be in breach of Section 40 as of Section 3 of the Constitution, which basically restricts people from the state from containing people or forcing people out of out of business. In this case, Honorable Speaker, we need to look at how does a company director get regulated irrespective of whether, irrespective of their background. And in that case, how can we exercise caution to ensure that these company directors are given the opportunity to operate their businesses, are given the opportunity to do their work without being influenced by a law that was brought to the House. However, Honorable Speaker, there is nothing wrong, and that's why I support the bill, but with observations. There is nothing wrong with the regulation. There is nothing wrong with putting these standard operating procedures to ensure that the directors of companies are regulated and the directors of companies are also obey or adhere to the law as it exists. Honorable Speaker, bringing sanity has also the issue of creating harmony in the directors themselves and obeying obeying the regulations as they are in the Companies Act and obeying the regulations as they are, the Code of Conduct of Directors. This institute may also have a function that will help companies to grow better and to perform better if it provides for disciplinary action for those directors who leak or mismanage information belonging to a company. Most of the companies collapse or there is total disarray within a company, especially the populous companies that are not individual, companies that are owned by many people. If some of the directors decide to release information, they do not obey the Secret Service Act, and therefore they release information from these companies. So such a provision needs to come in so that we can protect the companies and ensure that they can grow. When it comes to government companies or parastatals, vis-a-vis the private companies, Honorable Speaker, we have a system of electing or rather putting people into parastatals. But when people open their own companies, we do not look at the background of the people, we do not look at their capacity to do the work, we do not look at the professional qualifications of these people. So this institute will have a lot of work in sorting out those people and supporting, giving them the relevant capacity as it is required. But when it comes to government parastatals, there is a mechanism that is used to put directors into place, and there is also provision for these directors' capacity to be built within the functions of that particular parastatal. I believe there is always provision in terms of financial provisions or resources to support the capacity building aspect of it and to enable the director to behave in a specific way and basically do their business as it is. The bill speaks to existing directors and it lacks intake mechanism for the new directors. When it left open, Honorable Speaker, then we might have a problem. But there's also 100% inclusion might have a problem. So there's a lot that the sponsor of this bill will need to do. And even when you resort to the committee of the whole House, we will need to do in terms of looking at this bill and making it universally applicable in view of lawmaking in this country. Honorable Speaker, I support.
Honorable Bivi, member for Masinga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this chance to hear my views. I want to thank the mover of the bill so that we could be able to debate upon it, because to me it is a good thing that the directors have a place, have an institute which is able to regulate them, because as it is, everybody can become a director anywhere. And when it comes to discipline, there is no institute that is able to discipline them because there is no mechanism for that. But when this bill is enacted, then it will be able to bring sanity in the directors, in the board of directors, in the sector whereby these people are appointed, because they will be regulated, they will be able to even behave themselves because they know they can be, their contracts can be terminated. And also, even if it's a private company that has got directors, they should be checked on what they are doing to the company, because we have seen many directors forming companies, and once they have rooted even the members of the society, they close the companies and run away because they were not vetted, they are not regulated, they are nowhere to be traced, and they run away forever. And therefore, this institute will be able to check them the way other institutes normally does. The Institute of Engineers, the Institute of Architects, that normally checks them, and even they have their own annual general meetings to review how they are doing in their institution. And therefore, it's a very good bill, and I support what the Honorable Wamalo has been able to bring, and even the research that he has been able to do, although there are a few things that needs to be ironed, but it is a very good bill if we can pass it so that we don't have people that are left just loose. They can form any company and close it at will so that they can be able to be regulated, even by the government to be able to be checked. And therefore, I support.
Very well. Next is Honorable Koske Kimutai, member for Chepalungu.
Thank you, Speaker. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to add my voice on this bill. I want to thank Honorable Wamalwa for coming up with this very important bill. I've looked at it from page 1 to the last page. The only area that I might have an issue with Mheshimiwa Wamalwa is on part 4. Those conditions that you have put on part 4 are a bit tricky, and it might have some challenges in future going forward. Maybe you need to look at them and see how you can make it practical to most of the directors. Speaker, sir, Kenya directors in most of the companies have a big challenge in terms of having the capacity on how to manage their entities. Right now, when you look at the stock exchange, they are reporting quite huge losses in terms of shareholders getting the dividends. It's because of the directors. Most companies that Kenyans had a lot of hope in terms of success, they are going down because of skills and innovations that they need to move with time. So I support this bill because it's going to come handy in equipping Kenyans to become directors of many firms. So successful companies also in Kenya, part of them, when you look at their directors, they are not people who have they don't have even degrees. But there are some people who have inborn leadership. Look at Chandaria. It's doing well in Kenya. But if you ask the directors where they have come from, it's just mere inheritance of success stories of some other companies. Directors in also our institutions, they are messing up with institutions in Kenya. Because people are being given that position of director based on maybe political will, political goodwill, and they end up messing up with our institutions. So this bill is going to put Kenya in the roadmap of success. I want to thank Speaker for giving me that opportunity.
Very well. Before I give to Honorable Janet Nangambo, allow me to recognize at the Speaker's Gallery, Olelai Primary School, Kajiado North Constituency, Kajiado County. They are welcome to follow the proceedings of the National Assembly. Honorable Janet.
Asante, Mheshimiwa Speaker, kwa kunipa nafasi hii kuchangia mswada huu ule umeletwa na mbunge wa Kimini, ni mbunge wangu. Mheshimiwa Spika, nataka niseme ni mswada ule unaenda kurekebisha mambo katika nchi yetu ya Kenya, Mheshimiwa Spika. Na Mheshimiwa Spika, kabla sijaendelea, mimi pia nichukue nafasi hii pamoja na watu wa Trans Nzoia kutuma rambirambi zangu pamoja na wenyeji wa Trans Nzoia kwa wenzetu wale walipoteza maisha yao, akiwemo Governor Joyce Laboso na ndugu yetu Ken kutoka Kibera. Mheshimiwa Spika, nataka kusema walikuwa ni viongozi wale wamechangia sana katika nchi yetu ya Kenya, na viongozi wale wameonyesha msimamo wao hata wakati imekuja katika siasa bila kuekemea upande wowote. Mheshimiwa Spika, Mheshimiwa Spika, nikubali niongelee mswada huu ule umeletwa na Mheshimiwa Chris kuhusu hawa madirectors katika taasisi mbalimbali katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, ni ukweli vile wenzangu wamesema, tumekuwa na madirectors katika kampuni tofauti tofauti ama katika taasisi tofauti tofauti katika nchi yetu ya Kenya, na wamenyanyaza watu katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, naweza kusema kwamba unaona Nakumatt Supermarket ilianguka ni kwa sababu gani? Ni kwa sababu tulikuwa na madirectors wale hawajui kazi yao, na hakuna mtu aliangalia ni nini inaendelea katika hiyo nafasi ya Nakumatt Supermarket. Ndio ninasema Mheshimiwa Spika, ni vizuri sana tukue na madirectors katika taasisi hizi, kwa sababu watakuwa wanachunguza yale mambo yanaendelea katika taasisi zile wanashirikiana nao. Nataka niseme kile kimenifurahisha, hao washikadau watakuwa wanahudumu kwa miaka mitatu tu, na baada ya miaka mitatu huenda ikawa tutakuwa na wengine, Mheshimiwa Spika. Na hiyo ni vizuri sana, kwa sababu mtu akifanya kazi atakuwa anajichunguza jinsi alivyo na jinsi anavyoendeza mambo yake, Mheshimiwa Spika. Mheshimiwa Spika, nataka niseme kwamba hata lazima wengine wanapofanya ama wasipokuwa na nidhamu katika kazi zao, lazima wachukuliwe hatua, kwa sababu haitakuwa vyema mtu akozee alafu akifika mahali huyo mtu huenda bure bila mkono wa sheria kuchukua mkondo wake. Ninaona ni vyema, Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa wale watapata nafasi kushirikiana na wengine katika taasisi mbalimbali, Mheshimiwa Spika, ninawaomba wakuwe ni watu wenye wako na nidhamu na watu wenye watakuwa wanajua kazi yao, Mheshimiwa Spika. Mheshimiwa Spika, sisi tumekadhabishwa sana, kwa sababu ukiona serikali za counties nyingi zimeharibu pesa, nyingi hazijafanya kazi yao vizuri, na ndiposa tunasema hata wanaposema kwamba taasisi hii inatakikana kuchukuliwa mtu hata kama amefanya kwingine na aingie kwingine, lazima akuwe na maadili mazuri ya kuhakikisha kwamba akipewa nafasi ya kuhudumu katika taasisi hizi, inatakikana ikuwe ni mtu mwenye ako na nidhamu na sio mwenye ameharibu kwingine, na kwa sababu ya siasa huyo mtu tena anachukuliwa tu mara moja na anapewa nafasi tena katika taasisi hizi. Mheshimiwa Spika, ninasema kama kiongozi na haswa kutoka katika kaunti yangu, kwa sababu tumeona mengi pamoja na mbunge wangu mwenye ameleta mswada huu katika bunge hili kwa sababu ya kazi duni ile inafanyika katika kaunti yetu, Mheshimiwa Spika. Na ndiposa tukikuja kwa mambo ya taasisi hizi, Mheshimiwa Spika, wale madirectors wanachaguliwa ni lazima wakuwe na nidhamu, ndiposa wahudumu katika taasisi hizi, Mheshimiwa Spika. Mheshimiwa Spika, na nimshukuru tena Mheshimiwa Chris, vile wenzangu wamesema kuna yale marekebisho yatarekebishwa tukiingia kwa nini ya tatu tena, third reading, Mheshimiwa Spika, ndiposa turekebishe mambo ingine. Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipa nafasi hii.
Honorable members, allow me to recognize in the speakers in the public gallery the presence of students from Isunguluni Primary School, from Kibwezi constituency, Makueni County, who are here courtesy of the Honorable Jessica Mbalu, their Member of Parliament, who is also in the House. They are welcome to observe the proceedings of the House. I would also like to recognize in the presence
the presence of students from Guamu Primary School, Gishugu constituency, Kirinyaga County, who are also in the public gallery, and they are welcome to observe the proceedings of the National Assembly. Before we proceed, I see the intervention on a point of order by the Honorable Adagala. What is out of order, the Honorable Adagala?
On the death of our two senior people in this republic, our first...
The Honorable Adagala, could you use the next one? The next one, the next mic, the one that you're using is not very clear.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to say condolences to the families of the bereaved, our trailblazer Laboso and Ken Okoth.
The Honorable Adagala.
On behalf of Viga County, Mr. Speaker, sir, I just want to intervene here by saying that most members have deliberated upon this bill, and we are of the same opinion that this bill is receiving a lot of concern, and as per the Standing Order 95, Mr. Speaker, sir, you call upon the mover of the bill to reply. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Adagala, understand that your intervention was on our Standing Order number 95.
Yes.
Very well. Honorable members, allow me to put the question that the mover be called upon to reply. Will as many of that opinion say aye? Will as many of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. The Honorable Amadu will proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I want to thank all the honorable members who have supported this bill. And Mr. Speaker, as I reply on this bill, it is important to note, Mr. Speaker, the fears that honorable members have raised. For instance, the issues of entrepreneurship, whereby we have some directors who might be informal, they've not gone to school, but does not mean, Mr. Speaker, when you talk of the regulation here, that is coming to regulate them. The regulation there, it was implying this institute will have a board, and that board of that institute needs to be regulated. So the entrepreneurs who start their businesses, they are not regulated. So that regulation does not refer to somebody who has started a small business, let's say Chepalungu Dairy Farms. It does not regulate that. Here, mostly we are looking at the issues of corporate governance. And this forum, Mr. Speaker, will bring the directors together in terms of networking, in terms of learning the best practices, in terms of the refresher courses. So all the concerned issues that the honorable members have raised, Mr. Speaker, they'll be addressed when it comes to the committee of the whole house. And I looked at the bill, I looked at the report of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, and Mr. Speaker, I'm in agreement with whatever they had raised. But once we go to the committee of the whole house, Mr. Speaker, we are going to align, we are going to have amendments, so that those amendments, there must be issues of consistency. So we won't have any issues that will be contradicting the already existing laws, Mr. Speaker. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honorable members, and I beg to reply. Thank you.
Very well. Honorable Amalwa, job well done. Honorable members, I direct that the next necessary steps in regard to that business will be undertaken when the matter will be set down for consideration again. I therefore direct that we move to the next order of business.
Order number 11, the National Hospital Insurance Fund Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 5 of 2019, second reading.
The Honorable Wangwe does not seem to be in the house. I direct that that business be deferred, and we move to the next order.
Order number 12, the Employment Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 15 of 2019, a second reading.
The Honorable Martha Wangari does not also seem to be in the house. I therefore direct, I understand that she had requested that this particular business be deferred. I therefore direct that this business is deferred, and we move to the next order.
Order number 13, the Industrial Training Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 4 of 2019, second reading.
The Honorable Jude Jomo is not also in the house, and it's my understanding that he had requested that this business be deferred. I direct that this business be deferred as such, that I further direct that we move to the next order of business.
Order number 14, motion, review of the mandatory retirement age in the public service.
The Honorable Charles Njagwakanyi, the member for Starehe, the mover of the owner of this motion, had requested that it be deferred. I therefore direct that this business be deferred to the next time that it will be set down for consideration.
Order number 15, motion, policy measures to ensure 100% transition from secondary education to tertiary education.
The Honorable Wambugu John, the owner of this motion, is not in the house, and he had requested that it be deferred. I therefore direct that it should be deferred, and that we move on to the next order of business.
Order number 16, motion, cervical cancer screening services to all women and issuance of the HPV vaccine to boys and girls by the national government.
Honorable Teklatum is in the house. You may move your motion, the Honorable Tekla.
Honorable Speaker, I stand to move this motion, aware that cervical cancer is the leading cause of cancer in the country, causing the greatest number of deaths, with at least 8 to 10 women succumbing every year due to the disease. Further aware that most women diagnosed with precancerous changes in the cervix are in their 20s and 30s, but the average age of women when they are diagnosed with cervical cancer is the mid-50s. Honorable Speaker, considering that human papillomavirus, HPV, is one of the most common viruses in the world, 80% getting some type of HPV at least once in a lifetime, cognizant of the fact that men and women can get HPV, typically with the immune system getting rid of HPV without needing treatment, deeply concerned that the HPV is a major risk factor of cervical cancer, with nearly 99.7% of cervical cancers being caused by infections from high HPV risk factors. Honorable Speaker, appreciating that cervical cancer could be totally eliminated and further by putting preventive measures through timely treatments, I seek your support so that this Honorable August House could resolve that the national government to roll out free screening services to all women and issuance of HPV vaccines to boys and girls to reduce the mortality rates and completely eradicate deaths caused by cervical cancer in the country. Honorable Speaker, you are aware that we have lost many people to cancer. Right now, we have not buried Honorable Dr. Joyce Laposo, the governor of Bomet. We have not buried our colleague, Honorable Ken Okot. Cancer is a menace in the entire county, and HPV is the major cause of all the cancers. Honorable Speaker, are moving this motion because of the following reasons. Firstly, according to the National Cancer Institute, cervical cancer forms in the tissues of the cervix and in particular on the reproductive organs. According to the World Health Organization, Honorable Speaker, an estimated 570,000 new cases were reported in the year 2018. And Honorable Speaker, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, and lung cancers are killing people in the nation. Approximately 90%, Honorable Speaker, of deaths from cervical cancer occurred in low and middle-income countries, Kenya inclusive. According to the reports, cervical cancer is the second most cancer which kills women in the entire nation, and it is 20 to 30 years up to 50-something years, Honorable Speaker, and these are reproductive ages of women. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, all women are at risk for cervical cancer, and this disease occurs mostly in women over the age of 30. The human papillomavirus is the main cause of cervical cancer. It is a virus that is passed from one person to another during sex. Most sexually active people with HPV get HPV at some point in their lives, but few women get cervical cancer. Other factors, Honorable Speaker, which cause cervical cancer are intimacy at an early age, multiple sexual partners, sexually transmitted diseases, HIV, AIDS, and cigarette smoking. According to the IR Information Center on HPV and Cancer, about 9.1% of women in the general population are estimated to have HPV. Honorable Speaker, vaccination has emerged as important element of cancer prevention. Dr. Robinson from Australia, a Mayo Clinic pediatrician, states that vaccination is a miracle. We are talking about an infection that is ambiguous. By the time we are 50 years of age, 80% of us will have been infected. The HPV vaccine, Honorable Speaker, is a life changer because too many women living in poverty are died of cervical cancer. Honorable Speaker, according to the International Center for Reproductive Health in Kenya, HPV vaccination is not part of the national immunization scheme. In Australia, Honorable Speaker, when 65% of women were vaccinated, fewer heterosexual men were diagnosed with genital warts. So when people are given HIV vaccination, there is a reduction of cancers because it is sexually transmitted. Honorable Speaker, as I have said, there is need for vaccination. In Australia, among teen girls, infections with HPV types that cause cancers are reduced by 71%. Among young women, they were reduced by 61%. And the women who are vaccinated linked to cervical cancer dropped by 41%. Regular screening, Honorable Speaker, combined with HPV vaccination is important to the eradication of cervical cancer in the country. A case in point is Australia and Scotland, which have reduced cervical cancer, which is affecting women. Honorable Speaker, we should note that if a country like Australia has been able to reduce cervical cancer mortality rates, then I believe that Kenya can also do it. The causes of high mortality rates in low and high-income countries, Honorable Speaker, are poor access to medical facilities, especially in rural areas. We are all aware we can have one dispensary in a ward or in a sub-county or in a ward. Poor nutrition and comorbid conditions. Most people who want less than $1 a day, they don't have good nutrition, and that one can really, cancer can really spread in the shortest time possible. Honorable Speaker, another one is HIV. We know there is quite a number of people who are HIV positive, and finally, it can lead to cancers. There is also the issue of late presentation of cancer. People are not aware whether they have cancers because HPV vaccine is 10,000, and many cannot afford to go to hospital and be checked. Facilities for treatment also, Honorable Speaker, are limited in the low and middle-income countries, Kenya included, and where they are valuable, they are not affordable for the many people, especially women in the region. Honorable Speaker, I therefore note that with the introduction of the HPV vaccine to all boys and girls, as well as the regular screening of our women, then we would have sorted out of the challenges. I would urge the national government, through the Ministry of Health, to liaise with the county governments so as to be able to issue the HPV vaccine as well as the regular cervical cancer screening to all the women in Kenya, as it is widespread disease affecting us all in different capacities. Honorable Speaker, it is my prayer that our boys and girls are screened from ages 10, because such a disease, Honorable Speaker, is passed through sexual intercourse. Such a disease, Honorable Speaker, can also be passed through kissing. So, Honorable Speaker, we need to rescue our children. We need to rescue our women in the nation, because in the entire world, 570 women are dying of cervical cancer. In Kenya alone, every year, over 3,000 women are dying, and many of them have not gone to be checked. They don't know their status. So I call upon the government of Kenya to issue vaccines for HPV so that our children are given the vaccines from 10 years up to, and women up to 74 years. Honorable Speaker, I call upon Honorable Chepkwony to second this motion. Welcome.
The Honorable Tekla, before you call upon the Honorable Chepkwony, you need to move. You just need to say, I beg to move.
Oh, Honorable Speaker.
Yes.
May I take this opportunity? I beg to move this motion.
Very well.
And I beg to move the motion.
Very well.
Thank you.
Very well done. The Honorable Tekla, the Honorable Chepkwony.
Mr. Speaker, sir, let me start by thanking you for giving me this opportunity to support the motion, which is very crucial, to second the motion, which is very crucial at the moment. Mr. Speaker, sir, before I continue, let me start giving my sincere condolences to the family of Governor Lady Laboso. We as Joro
The Honorable
community,
Chepkone, just hold on. Give her another mic. That one is not too clear, please.
thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Sorry, today my voice is a bit hoarse because of some small reasons. I'm standing here, Mr. Speaker, to say thank you for the chance to support this fantastic motion, to second this fantastic motion brought here by Member of Parliament, Women Rep from Nandi. And before I continue, Mr. Speaker, let me just give my sincere condolences to the family of our sister, Honorable Laboso, the Governor of Bomet. And at this moment, Mr. Speaker, let me say also, Joro constituency, where I'm elected, and Kenya as a whole, we have lost a big hero. We are really in pain as women. We have lost a big champion. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm rising to support the motion. The cervical cancer, Mr. Speaker, sir, has now become terrorist to girls and women. Cancer, Mr. Speaker, sir, it has become also merciless to girls and women in the world today. I wish also, Mr. Speaker, sir, to say, as my colleague has talked, the cervical cancer is actually killing over 3,000 women in this country every year. And Mr. Speaker, sir, this is the high time we said that we can no longer wait for us to lose more women in this country. Mr. Speaker, sir, the cervical cancer has become the most common disease in East and Central Africa. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm rising to support the motion and to say this is the high time the government of Kenya woke up into reality and to realize that, Mr. Speaker, sir, we can no longer sit in this country watching people dying mercilessly, hopelessly in this country with things we know the government can take care. Mr. Speaker, sir, in order to make sure that we have precautions, we are requesting also the government to bring free medical checks and the treatment for all the patients in relation to cervical cancer. Mr. Speaker, sir, we are also interested to see the government having free cervical cancer screening. This is for the awareness and for more prevention. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we also need to emphasize this is the high time the government of Kenya came up with primary health care services in all dispensaries and health centers in this country to make sure that all women in our rural and urban areas, they have somewhere they can access those free screens. And Mr. Speaker, sir, with those few comments, I would also like to remind the entire country that in Article 43(1) of the Constitution, which provides that every person has the right to the highest attainable standard of health, which includes the right to health care services, including reproductive health care. Mr. Speaker, sir, as an elected member of parliament and as a female member of parliament, we wish this issue of cervical cancer to be taken very seriously in this country. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'm rising just to support my colleague that this is the high time, to second my colleague that this is the high time the government of Kenya took serious measures on this matter, and we try to prevent more deaths of our people in this scenario. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support the motion, to second the motion, and thank you very much.
Honorable members, allow me to propose the question. That are aware that cervical cancer is the leading type of cancer in the country, causing the greatest number of deaths, with at least 8 to 10 women succumbing every day to the disease. Further aware that most women diagnosed with precancerous changes in the cervix are in their 20s and 30s, but the average age of women when they are diagnosed with cervical cancer is the mid-50s. Considering that human papilloma virus, HPV, is one of the most common viruses in the world, with 4 out of 5, 80% persons getting some type of HPV at least once in a lifetime, cognizant of the fact that men and women can get HPV, typically with the immune system getting rid of HPV without needing treatment. Deeply concerned that HPV is a major risk factor of cervical cancer, with nearly 99.7% of cervical cancers being caused by infection from high-risk HPV. Appreciating that cervical cancer could be totally eliminated and further averted by putting preventive measures through timely treatments. This House therefore resolves that the national government rolls out free screening services to all women and issuance of the HPV vaccines to boys and girls to reduce the mortality rates and completely eradicate deaths caused by cervical cancer in the country. I will give the first opportunity to the Honorable Mutai Kiplangat, member for Bureti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to support this motion and want to say thank you to the mover of the motion for thinking of this issue, Mr. Speaker. Cancer, Mr. Speaker, as it stands now in this country, is a national disaster. It has reached a point, Mr. Speaker, where the nation should declare it a national disaster. It's a scourge. It's killing its citizen. I stand here, Mr. Speaker, that at this time this motion is coming before this House, we are mourning the death of the Governor of Bomet, Honorable Dr. Joyce Laboso, as a result of cancer. She passed away as a result of cancer. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we are mourning the death of our colleague, Ken Akoth, MP for Kibera, who died as well as a result of cancer. Some of us, Mr. Speaker, have constituents who currently they are suffering from this disease, which I call it a national disaster. Everyone in this House is affected by this scourge. In one way or another, we are victims of this national disaster, Mr. Speaker. The idea being raised here, Mr. Speaker, is that the government should take proactive measures to ensure that this issue is addressed. Every single weekend, Mr. Speaker, we attend to matters touching on this cancer in our constituency, and it's not nice before our eyes. As leaders, we cannot stand by and watch as this thing eats into the society, eats into our livelihoods, and destroys our nation. We need to address it, Mr. Speaker. The fact that screening should be done for freely is a welcome idea. The fact that the necessary medicine be available for free to the affected persons is much welcome. And I want to thank the mover, Mr. Speaker. And the time when this motion is coming before the House is very critical. This is a poignant moment, Mr. Speaker. As it stands, Mr. Speaker, it's not only the cervical cancer And I would urge the move of the motion that you encompass all aspects of cancer, that we address it wholesomely. Cervical cancer is affecting our sisters, our mothers, our cousins, but also other forms of cancer. Even for men, prostate cancer is a disaster. Men nowadays do not even want to think of the idea that somebody would be visiting your private parts to do some screening and do everything. But this cancer has caused us to even put aside the issue of dignity because you want a life. Mr. Speaker, I think it's about time that as a House we rise up to the occasion and ensure that measures are put in place to address this issue. Mr. Speaker, when HIV first struck or came to be known, it took a strong intervention of the entire nation and the whole cry from the entire country to address it to a certain level that right now, Mr. Speaker, we are witnessing lowering levels of HIV-reported cases in our country, which is a success in the entire world because we want to kill the disease. The same thing, Mr. Speaker, I think that cancer should be declared a national disaster so that all the efforts and energies of the government should be directed towards addressing this menace. Mr. Speaker, the availability of drugs and the treatment of this disease is what's killing our nation also. To treat cancer, Mr. Speaker, is expensive. It kills the spirit of the patient. It washes away, it clears away all the investment anyone has, and eventually it kills you, leaving the family behind in poverty, in desperation, and also dealing with the aspect of losing a loved one. Mr. Speaker, let's look at this, and as we pass this motion before this House, I want to urge all the other committees to pick up this idea and follow it to its logical conclusion, and we engage the necessary departments to ensure that we address this menace, this scourge, this national disaster for the betterment of this country. We cannot imagine this country rising up to the levels we want to reach if we don't have unhealthy. When someone is suffering from cancer, it requires urgent attention from the members of the family. That means other issues are not attended to. And we cannot have a strong economy while we have an unhealthy nation. Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this motion, and I want to say it's a motion whose time has come, and I would urge all other members that we support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Indeed, it is a timely motion, and thank you, the Honorable Dr. Tekla, for bringing it. And before I give the next opportunity to the next speaker, I would like to just record my condolences to the family of the Honorable Okoth and Governor Laboso, who was my boss, and who used to sit in this very seat where I sit in the last parliament. Really, it is a sad day, and this motion is really relevant at this time. The next speaker will be the Honorable Odworo Mbaka, member for Siaya.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Before I say anything, let me also take this opportunity to send my condolences to the family of Honorable Governor Joyce Laboso, who was a friend and also a lady we went to UK with for further studies after we had won scholarships from the British Council. I also want to send my condolences to the family of Ken Okoth, who is also a friend, and we worked very closely in the first parliament, and we were both members of Education Committee where he participated very, very well. My contribution to this topic is as follows. One, that it is a topic that has taken too long to come to this House. Cancer is a disease that is long-term. Once it is diagnosed, it is said by specialists that it can be prevented once it is found on time. And that most people cannot detect they have the disease after it has reached a certain level where it is untreatable. In that case, it becomes long-term, it becomes very traumatizing and very expensive for the family, and the person who's affected normally has to abandon everything. Particularly, they have to quit their jobs, and they have to go home to take care of themselves. It is a very devastating disease. It is very, very expensive, and the treatment in this country is very poor. If you look around at the hospitals that we have where one can get proper care, one sees that we do not have enough doctors, and even those doctors who are specialized in treating this kind of disease. We have few of them, and that's why most people seek treatment abroad. You can imagine those who don't have money to go abroad. A lot of them die in the homes. A lot of them die in dilapidated hospitals, and there's simply no care for the people who are affected by this disease. It is true that women suffer a lot from this disease. My own mother died of cervical cancer, and so I'm aware of how traumatizing it can be. In my family, we were always crying. We did not know how to manage the disease at the family level, and we caused so much stress to my own mother, who didn't want us to shed any tear because she was in great pain. A lot of people cannot manage this disease. We are all traumatized as family members when a family member or a loved one is down with this disease. So therefore, the women suffer a lot. I know women have different types of cancers. We have breast cancers, and then we also have cervical cancers, apart from other cancers that we do have, like blood cancer or throat cancer or any other. While the women suffer a lot of cancer, we cannot forget to talk about men as well. They also have different types of cancers. They have throat cancer that is also known, and also blood cancer and many others. They are emerging from time to time, different types of cancers. And so to me, it may not be just a woman issue alone, but it is also affecting the men that we live with in our homes. And so when we're talking about cancer, I'd like us to think about men as well. And the children do suffer from cancer as well. You know, when you go to hospitals, you will see a section within the hospital where children are kept or being taken care of. Some of them have cancer as well. So it is a whole world of people who suffer from cancer. And when we're dealing with cancer in this country, I think we're dealing with health matters that are not properly addressed in our system. I want to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, that there's a lot that doctors have talked to us about. I have listened to what cancer is all about and how it can be prevented. We are constantly reminded that individuals must go for checkups every year, full checkup, to find out if there could be a symptom of cancer so that it can be prevented on time. Because it's a disease that is very tricky in the sense that it is so silent. You don't get to feel it. It doesn't pain you when it starts. It starts paining when it has overblown, when it is now too advanced, so that treatment, it becomes difficult. And so that's why it is advised that people should go for checkups early enough, or even when you feel well, just go for a checkup. So I think that is the message that we need to know, and also to train our young girls and boys and everybody else in this country that we need to go for checkups, and it should be a culture, a habit that we do year by year. I know it's also expensive even to go for a checkup. It's also expensive, and so the health sector must help us access health services on time, make them cheaper. Many people cannot even afford to be members of national health system. They don't have medical cards. In the village where we come from, people just come home and ask you for money for Panadol, for small medicine. So how about checking up
for cancer. It's definitely going to be very expensive. That's why the health sector, the Ministry of Health should come strong on this matter and ensure that health is not only devolved, but that it is cheaper and accessible to many people. Health education is critical. We must educate ourselves, and we must also educate our children in school that there's diseases that can affect them even as young as they are, so that they know what to do and all that. Families, the same. So health education is very, very important. And I want to thank Mheshimiwa Tekla for this very timely bill that is coming here on cancer. And since we have already talked about cancer even before, I think now we need to put more energy in making this law become real. And then once it becomes real, then the health sector should now take it up and run with it. It is killing, it is devastating. We are losing young people, very brainy, very useful to this country, too early in life. And we need them, and as we keep on losing young people, we are losing, it's part of the brain drain, We are losing brains. People like Ken Okoth, people like Colemo, who passed away a month ago, people like Labozo, and many more who have passed on because of cancer, is because we really, really need to be aware, and we need to take care of those who are ill very well, instead of sitting around them and feeling so pitiful and causing more stress to them at the family level. I think even families should be encouraged to know how to treat or to manage long-term illnesses that come as a result of cancer. Otherwise, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. It is a very good bill. Thank you very much.
Honorable members, I know we all have about 10 minutes to speak, but there's a lot of interest in this, and we missed the boat when we would have restricted the time to speak. So when you get an opportunity, please try to limit so that we can have as many members as possible to also speak on this. I think it will be fair to all of us. The next member will be the Honorable Member for Ainamoi, the Honorable Martim.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to contribute to this very important motion. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my good friend, Honorable Dr. Tekla Tum, for bringing up this very important motion. And as you say, Mr. Speaker, it is very timely. I want to use this opportunity on behalf of residents of Ainamoi constituency to sincerely pass my condolences to people of Kibra constituency, the people of Bomet, for the loss of their leaders. Mr. Speaker, it is true that cancer is a national disaster. It is time that the government invests heavily in advanced machines and technology to assist in detecting cancer at an early stage. I'm not a medic, but studies show that if we detect cancer early enough, we'd manage to contain it. A healthy nation is a wealthy nation. I want to encourage county government in collaboration with national government to ensure that in every county we have a functional cancer center. It is going to assist us big time. And as I contribute, Mr. Speaker, almost every weekend in our constituencies, we attend to functions, be it be fundraisers, be it be funerals that are related to cancer. As I speak today, I know of a few people, some in India, seeking medication because of cancer. Some are lying in hospital beds because of cancer. And treating cancer, Mr. Speaker, is very expensive. I know there's a bill coming up on NHIF. And I will wish NHIF will be advanced to cover medication on cancer-related diseases. The procedure, the cycles are so expensive that human beings, citizens, Kenyans who cannot afford expensive medical covers are going through a lot. And I wish NHIF will be advanced to cover up to 50,000, because on average, every process, every cycle chemotherapy is about 50,000. The match that NHIF would pay is 25,000. The whole process covers 6 cycles. For people who do not have stable source of income, they are going through a lot of challenges trying to treat cancer. Therefore, I want to support this motion, and I wish the county government, the national government will invest heavily on cancer screening machines. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Kitayama Maisuri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to condole with the Governor Lavoso and the family, and also condole with our colleague Ken Okoth and the family. I also want to take note of the fact that I myself lost my mother in 2016 of cancer of the stomach. So this is a motion which I support with a lot of attachment to, because it has hit home. And as a family, we went through quite a traumatizing time when this came visiting our home. Mr. Speaker, I just want us to go beyond just talking in these motions. Because, Mr. Speaker, since we came into this parliament, we have spoken about cancer here. Probably more than 3 motions. This could be the 3rd or 4th motion. And each time, Mr. Speaker, it just remains there. And that doesn't help this country. What would help this country, Mr. Speaker, is to relook into the health setup of this country. Constitution 2010 that devolved health services. But maybe that is the beginning of the mistakes that we made as a country. Probably we could have done slightly better, Mr. Speaker, by identifying each and every level of, say, level 4 or level 5, that we do, we purposely ensure that these hospital facilities are given proper government funding and equipment, so that this cancer and other diseases that are very, very serious and chronic can be attended to affirmatively. Because, Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking this from experience that a county like the one I come from, the county of Migori, level 5 hospital in Migori, the county headquarters, is the only semblance facility you find that has some semblance of machinery that can, equipment that can look into this kind of diseases. But at the lower levels, which is where the majority of the rural people are found, Mr. Speaker, they do not have even mere basic medicine, let alone equipment that could detect this. And you can imagine if a population of 1.2 million people were to seek medical attention in one referral hospital or one hospital in Migori, for example, at the county headquarters, Mr. Speaker, your guess is as good as mine. It will be very difficult for these services to reach the people who are generally very, very poor. Diagnosis that we get, because there are no doctors in the rural facilities, the dispensaries and other facilities, the diagnosis that is given to the poor mothers and poor people in the villages is wrong to begin with. Because they start by being told that they have stomach problems. Next, they are told that they have ulcers. And by the time cancer is detected, it is at level 4. That is not helpful. And that's why I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, as I support this motion, it really needs to move beyond just talking about it and supporting it and then leaving it at that stage, Mr. Speaker. So I do support and thank my sister Tum for bringing this motion. It's very, very timely. But I think it needs to move now to
the irresponsible people that we have given the responsibility to deal with the healthcare. We need to now move beyond that to regulations and policies that are going to ensure that it is a must and not just a matter that can only be dealt with because somebody has reached the facility. It needs to move to that level, Mr. Speaker. So I want to support this motion and request that all of us as a country look at it in that mode. And anyone who visits a facility, it should be mandatory that as you visit a facility, be it you're seeking maternal health care, that you be tested for this as a compulsory, one of the compulsory tests that would happen to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable Nzengu, member for Mwingi North. But before you speak, the Honorable Nzengu, allow me to recognize in the public gallery the presence of students from Nyaimera Secondary School, South Mugirango, Kisii County, and students from Ogieksotik Mixed Day School from Kuresoi South Constituency, Nakuru County. They are welcome to observe the proceedings of this House. Proceed, the Honorable Nzengu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this important motion. And just before I contribute into the motion, I want to take this opportunity to pass on my condolences to the families and members of Kibra constituency for the loss of Honorable Okoth, and also that of Honorable Dr. Joyce Laboso, the governor for Bomet County, and also to the other families across the country, and in particular in my constituency, because we know this disease of cancer is killing people daily. Every weekend we are spending money and time in burying different people in our constituencies out of death of cancer. My own father also, I lost him through the same, so this is something that we are so close to that it is timely that this motion has been brought in. In support of this motion, I want